Hello, everyone. This is Hanney of Critical Faculty. Today, I have a guest that for long, I wanted to have a chat with. I watched her interviews, especially a particular one, back in 1984, and I think there was a bit of a pioneer moment where a daughter and mother have taken over an opera and a particular Oprah Winfrey show just to show the world a slightly different angle to faith and belief. And I'm very thrilled to be having a chat with her today. Hello, Annie Laurie. How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning to you. Well, it's morning as well in Melbourne, Australia. It's worth 1 o'clock in the morning, but it is morning. Right, we were chatting offline just before we started the show, and we started with this conversation back in 1984. And to me, was this the start of that particular movement where secular people starting to voice their opinions and show that they're there and asking for help as they are departing away from religion?
My mother and I started the Freedom from Religion Foundation back in 1976 when I was a college student, and she was a pioneering feminist activist. And she was asked to take our group national in America in 1978. So we had been going for some time before that particular invitation from Oprah Winfrey, but we were doing quite a few talk shows at that time, and there were a lot fewer of us in those days. It was a lot harder. You did not have famous people on your side. People were skittish of the word atheist or even agnostic, but it's quite different today, with about a quarter of the population in the United States identifying as nuns, N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S. But so I can't say that particular moment was, the beginning of something different. It was part of a gradual ascent of the free thought movement in the United States. And certainly, but for us personally, for me personally, it was a great moment because that was the first time that we met Dan Barker, who is now my husband, co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And he has brought a lot to the movement because he was an evangelical minister, very, very committed and devout, who lost, as he likes to say, just lost faith in faith, threw out the bathwater and found there was no baby there. My mother and I had very different backgrounds. I'm a third generation freethinker on my mother's side of the family. So I grew up without religion. I did not have that monkey on my back to get rid of like Dan did. And our movement is probably about 20% people like us who have at least one family member who wasn't religious, but the rest of most of our members, our 35,000 members today, were raised in some kind of a religious household. So they had to come to their beliefs through hard thought and against the tide, and often with nobody there that they knew who was an atheist. And that was true in Dan's case. And he told us, we met just before the show for breakfast, and he's told us he had never met and spoken with another atheist. He had one pointed out to him, but we were his first atheists. And so he called himself a baby atheist. And so a lot of people have to go through that, which is unfortunate, that people are indoctrinated and all have to work their way out of it. But plaudits to those who do.
Yes, I mean, watching this show is a sort of broad different types of atheism, because I can see that you're quite confident. You were quite confident at the time, and I had a suspicion that you might have been raised that way because you were so confronting, you were so assured. While Dan, I mean, even though he was still confident, assured, but he did not want to confront the supposedly very religious crowds at that particular studio. He wanted to sort of ease into it while you are just so comfortable. You've already been sort of done that for quite some time. But this is where I start seeing a little bit of, I'm not sure, do you want to call it feminism or women rights? Because sometimes, that these two terms can be quite confusing to some.
Well, there's no question that the free thought movement, the secular movement, and women's rights, feminism go hand in hand. And in fact, in the United States, all of the major original founders, and even worldwide, of feminist movements, movements for women's rights, have typically been religious rebels or outright, free thinkers. Someone like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was apparently the first woman in the world to call for women's right to vote, to insist that that be on the plank of the first Women's Rights Convention in 1848 in Seneca Falls. She was a rebel who shortly after became an agnostic and wrote the Woman's Bible and dedicated more than 40 years of her life, in a sense, to freeing women from degrading superstitions, as she called it. Before that, Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote The Vindication of the Rights of Woman, the first kind of feminist handbook. I think it was 1792, but don't quote me, right around there. She was a deist in the sense of the Enlightenment, and then later became an agnostic. She married William Godwin, the atheist. And the whole premise in A Vindication of the Rights of Woman is treat women like rational creatures. She was very much opposed to that indoctrination. And you can go right down the line in the United States in terms of the very earliest women speaking out for women's rights, like Frances Wright, who was a Scottish heiress who came to our country in the 1820s and worked for abolition. She was the first woman to speak publicly before a mixed, they call them promiscuous audiences of men and women. She went on a speaking tour in 1828 to disabuse women of to get them out of the sway of evangelists who were having all these revivals. And she said, turn your churches into, fill the vacuum of your mind, turn your churches into halls of science. She was adamantly against religion. And these are just a few examples. The ranks of the earliest feminist movement were just full of heretics. So, and free thought in turn has been very, very supportive. The free thought movement has been very, very supportive of women's rights because of the role of religion in degrading women.
I'm pretty sure you've seen that the wonderful human partition in the brain where people can have two crazy ideas, like Isaac Newton, with all these wonderful, I think in 20 months he came up with all these things that would take 100 scientists to come up with in decades. But then he believed in some wacky ideas like the angles of the Jewish temple, or getting gold out of basic metals and stuff like that. I have seen some feminists who would argue women's rights, but somehow they are religious and they belong to the Abrahamic faith. How can these two square up?
Well, I think that first of all, the religious institutions, the religious people, have come along because of the earlier heretics and unorthodox who have opened the door and have changed society. I mean, in the United States, now most denominations support marriage equality and gay rights. Of course, the biggies don't: Catholic, Mormon, evangelical. But even the other more liberal churches were mostly belated. It's easy enough to support something after 200 years of struggle by earlier feminists, for example. But I think that most studies show, speaking of the Bible, speaking of the United States, that most believers in the United States haven't read their Bible. Atheists are better read when it comes to knowing the Bible than the typical churchgoer. So in that sense, they don't know what their Bible teaches. They've been told it's a good book. And so if they are fairly liberal and they support women's rights, they probably just assume the good book also supports women's rights. They're sort of ignorant. But you're right, the mind can be bifurcated, and people are taught not to apply reason to religion. They can apply to everything else, but that's a no-no, that's taboo. And so maybe they don't examine their religion very closely if they suspect that that their personal beliefs might deviate from religion.
One of the things that really sort of anger me is the culture, the PC culture.
I'm so sorry, I can't hear you.
How about now?
A little better.
It's a little better. Okay, I'll get a bit closer to that because I understand you're using a different headset today. Can you hear me all right?
I can now.
Okay, fantastic. All right. One of the things that make me a little bit sort of angry, and I don't know if what are your views on that, is we're hitting into a culture which is it's a lot more PC. There are certain things that are imposed, like for example, certain corporations will deem it completely incorrect and a conduct or a breach in the conduct of employees if they act or do a certain thing. And it might hide them from their sexist views. They might have sexist views, but they will suppress them because of the PC culture that really never deals with the root causes. So you end up with a culture of people believing in something but acting out in a slightly different way, just so they don't get problems, they don't get headache, they don't get issues from their employers or the culture they live in. Do you think we're better off not hiding it? And those who oppose, let's say, equality between men and women, is to come out for real and have a proper argument. Because if you want to convince somebody, you should eradicate it from the root, fix the problem from the root, and not just from the surface by applying an umbrella protection of the idea, even though people are not convinced of it. What are your views on that bit?
Well, I have mixed views on that because, to give an example, sometimes you don't need to really change somebody's mind to change society. Here in the United States, we are dealing with, we've had more deaths from COVID than any other country. And we have a huge backlash against this wonderful scientific quote unquote miracle of our vaccines, where people should be so grateful that we have a vaccine, and yet we have a huge pushback by many individuals and by many of our Republican governors, for example, against vaccine mandates, which are working. And people who are opposed to the vaccines, I just read a news article today in the New York Times about the biggest chicken plant, Tyson plant factory, it's very conservative, but they're requiring workers to get vaccinated. They had a huge number of deaths, and they're doing it for financial reasons only. But they quoted one of the workers saying, well, I was very against the vaccine, but now I'm glad I had it. I'm glad that it didn't make me think about it. Being forced to do it was a good thing. I mean, that's the whole point about public health mandates. So I think that sometimes you mandate something, you have a law protecting abortion rights, you have a law protecting saying you can't have sex discrimination, you have a law saying that there's equality for LGBTQ, and then people will go with it because it becomes the norm. They don't have to think about it. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but when you have something as important as protecting the public health, should you allow people to simply make up their own minds, uninformed people, just saying, I just don't like being told what to do, or I have a religious objection? Should they be determining our public policy, or should the public policy be based on the consequences to the public? Should we be applying reason and science to our public policy? Well, of course. So whatever those, myriad thousands of little personal objections you might find in the public don't really matter so long as you make them get that vaccine. The problem, of course, is the pushback. I mean, the resistance is causing problems. But normally we have required vaccinations in our public schools just to attend schools. Why are we thinking that the COVID vaccine shouldn't be required now in our public schools? This is a huge debate in the United States. There's only 2 states in the whole country that are mandating that public school children who are eligible for vaccines should be vaccinated in the midst of a pandemic. So, of course, I'm all for the mandates, and I do think there may be individuals who don't think women are equal, but so long as we have the right to vote, that we have equality in our nation, they can't hold us back.
I completely understand this from purely pragmatic point of view, because obviously in a perfect world, you'd love everybody to be intellectually convinced of things, but that's not the world we live in. There will be people for various reasons, just maybe because of genetically, they don't have that sort of maybe the IQ, and I don't want to say that, but it's that, sometimes it is that.
I also think that they do move along. Like I said, almost all of the major liberal denominations now support marriage equality. Almost all Americans who were so opposed to it 15 years ago. There were all these laws being passed at the state level to amend state constitutions to say that marriage is limited to one man and one woman. And today, the vast majority of Americans support marriage equality. And part of that is because we had a US Supreme Court decision in 2015 that affirmed marriage equality. It opened people's eyes and they moved up. They moved along with it. So I do think that the rational public policy does move people forward.
Well, indeed, I completely agree. I think, generation, but there is a Sidegeist, the spirit of the time, and from one generation to another, I think things are happening right now. 200 years ago would be considered absolute insanity, but right now they're just normal, even in the eyes of religious people. It's just business as usual. They're now, even the atheistic and faithful debate has actually shifted. It's no longer conversation about miracles and stuff like that. So it's about the science, and there are some actually science by God signaling scientific discoveries. Even the conversation has changed from the William Lane Craig, the Kalam cosmological argument, trying to invoke science. So that it shifted. It's no longer about crazy stuff like that. It's gone into the spirit of the age, which is science. Just go back to the situation and that Abrahamic God, starting from Yahweh, obviously the original figure, and his first conversation with humanity. And when we look at the book of Genesis, and
I'm having trouble hearing again. I wish there might be something I can do on this end, but
that's all right.
Comes in and out.
Is this better now?
Yeah.
I'm going to make my microphone so close to me, it's going to impede a little bit, but hopefully that's a lot better for you. All right. So from the very first scene of the creation, we see the situation where Adam is created and Eve is almost like an afterthought. He's like, he probably needs a companion sort of thing. So Adam was always the first idea, and then comes Eve in the scene as this kind of a second thought. And then we have the original sin situation where Eve was the culprit, the one that started it all, and she's condemned from that point on. Do you think from the very inception, obviously that and with the 10 commandments, and there are certain commandments that shows women to be in the same level as beasts and houses and things, with the coveting statement. Do you think from that particular point that man-made religion taken over by the patriarchal power has showed its true colors by that God acting as the first sexist person to enter the realm?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm still having trouble hearing, but I think I got at the end of it, you were saying, that Eve was framed, by the third chapter of Genesis. A woman has been told that she's sinful. She's to blame for bringing sin and death into the world. She's to be ruled over by her husband. He shall rule over thee. And she's to bring forth children in sorrow. So, we are condemned, in the opening pages of the Old Testament or the Hebrew text or whatever, which is shared in common. The Abrahamic religions share in common. Mm-hmm. And of course, this is, a major religions predicated on scapegoating women and blaming women and subjugating women. And it also, of course, led in Christianity to the supposed need for a savior to save us from what happened in the Garden of Eden. So some feminists have postulated that Eve should be made a saint, you know. And I wrote a book about the Bible, Woe to the Women, the Bible Tells Me So. Woe to the Women is a verse from the Bible. And women are rapeable. They're property of their fathers and then of their husbands. They are unclean. This is a huge theme throughout the Bible. They are supposed to give penance for having menstrual periods. They also for giving birth. They're unclean for giving birth. If they give birth to a male child, they're less unclean. They're literally worth less. They talk about how much men and women are worth, that women are worth fewer shekels. And of course, they're just their property and have hardly any rights in the Bible. And then in the New Testament, when we're looking at Christianity, we have all those horrible injunctions: women be in silence, in subjection. You can only learn from your husband. You can't speak in public. And put down after put down, that we're gossips and we're whatever. And the horrible ending of the New Testament in the Revelations, which is all about the horrible things that are going to happen to Jezebel, or it's just really quite a nightmare of a book when it comes to women. We're only about 10% of the Bible. Most of the women in the Bible don't even have a name, but very clearly women are inferior according to these religions. And that's really the main thing that underpinning the fight for women's equality. We've had to overcome that nasty book. And I'm sure you're going to talk about the Quran and what women are still having to overcome.
Well, we've got some literature in Islam, a couple of things that you might find very entertaining, where it talks about when a Muslim man is praying, there are 3 things that would void that prayer: a donkey, a black dog, or a woman. It's insane just to actually talk about this, and people actually believe in this. This is a thing. Another situation where it's almost like the our book of Revelation type of thing, where Muhammad, Prophet of Islam, goes to first of all to Al-Aqsa Mosque overnight. He's actually taken by Gabriel over a flying mule sort of beast, and he goes to Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and then into the 7th heaven to meet all the prophets and God. And he sees hell, kind of Dante's inferno, but most of the inhabitants were women. And these women are suspended from all the organs where they've committed all the atrocities that are the main causes of why the world is on fire. So from their tongues and from their boobs and from all the crazy stuff and all these stereotypical ideas that it shows, it's complete insanity. And I wonder why. And then this is where I get very frustrated by the situation. Why would humanity, shared by males and females, why would one half literally choose to shoot themselves in the foot by hindering 50% of the society to create and contribute, because the contribution is going to go back to all. It's not just going to go back to women, it will go back to humanity. Imagine the state of science. And it took Marie Curie, and I'm going to talk about her in a couple of weeks about it. She's a double Nobel Prize winner, first woman. And imagine if women were free and not burnt at the stake, being mistaken for witches, maybe because they're a little bit outspoken or pioneers of their times. There could be scientists in there that were burnt. Imagine how advanced we could be in flying cars by now, for goodness sake.
Mary Daly, who was a Catholic dissident theologian, had a very wise line. She said, so long as God is male, male is God. So the patriarchal system wants to keep itself going and have its own rules and regulations that are all based on male supremacy. But you're right, society has shot itself in the foot by suppressing half of its population. And so much of this is based on women's life-giving biology, and patriarchal religion puts that on its head. It says that if you're looking at Christianity, well, you're saying that the male God created everything, first of all, but then in Christianity, God somehow gives birth to himself. I mean, there's the crazy idea of the Trinity and the impregnation of a virgin to give birth to itself, a God who already exists, Jesus. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, but it's male the man giving birth, really the man being in charge of everything. And it's really the women who keep the human race going. And instead, our menstrual periods that are part of our natural fertility are unclean, and our childbirth is unclean, and we're inferior. It really is, I think, a great example of fearing women's biological powers, fearing them and therefore trying to subjugate them. And of course, there's a lot of postulations, the need for a patriarchal society to be sure that you know who the real father is. So you keep those women in a harem, or you keep them segregated so that you can make sure they're really giving birth to your children, and so on. But I think it just becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. We look at the Vatican, for example, all those men in charge, trying to keep everything going just the same as it always has been. And I'm hoping society has really opened up. We've seen all the things that women have been able to do just in my lifetime. When I grew up in the United States, my mother worked outside the home, and she was one of the few mothers like that in my neighborhood. It was the Ozzie and Harriet women, middle-class women, housewives only. We see The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan talking about the problem that has no name. We have seen the huge change in the number of women going to college. We're now the majority in the United States. When I had a woman doctor because she was from Poland, but there were otherwise not women doctors. You didn't know any women attorneys. Now we have 3, we need more, on the Supreme Court. So, there's been huge radical changes just in my lifetime, for the good, for the most part, for women. And we are seeing this around the world. So hopefully we won't go back. But in the United States, of course, speaking of our Supreme Court, we have had Trump appoint 3 members of the Supreme Court. And we have seen the replacement of Ruth Bader Ginsburg with a Catholic handmaiden, Amy Coney Barrett. And we are truly facing, for us, what looks like the demise of abortion rights. Roe versus Wade was passed by the court in 1973, and most people predict that it will be overturned or entirely beside the point and crippled by its 50th anniversary in 2023. And that abortion rights, the right to own your own body, the right to decide whether and if you want to bear a child, become a mother, become a parent, is integral to all other rights that women have. If you can't decide and time your children, you can't control anything else. So so much of this renaissance for women in my lifetime has to do with the fact that they've been able to use birth control, or end an unwanted pregnancy, or get a tubal ligation and control their fertility. And we are seeing a huge religious fight in our country, a minority imposing its religious views against abortion based on the premise that there's a soul, at the moment of fertilization, which is a religious belief that is not a science. It's not true. It can't be proved. And this is a huge catastrophe. We're in crisis here in the United States. And I just want to say that the Freedom from Religion Foundation actually had its start because of my mother's early work to try to end criminalization of abortion rights, which that battle was only about a decade in organizing, and it came very swiftly in the United States. But there's been such a huge religious backlash, and it's what opened our eyes to the need to start the Freedom from Religion Foundation, that we did not want religion in any of our laws and social policy. And my mother died several years ago, and at 88, and she was a wonderful fighter, but in some ways I'm very glad she's not here to see what is happening right now, where a minority of religious fanatics are imposing their views on the rest of us. And we have a total ban almost on abortion in Texas. We have a Supreme Court that isn't doing anything about it, that looks poised to accept other bans. So it's really is a crisis right now for women's rights in the United States.
Definitely want to come back to the abortion situation, because that was part of the things I wanted to talk to you about today, especially what's happening in the US at the moment. But I just want to step back a little bit to the bigger picture before we go back to abortion, where religion is always the issues. It's causing all the issues, and it's got all the problems and everything. But I think I might gonna be reasonable and do the honorable thing and say, hey, not all the problems are caused by religion. So, for example, that sexism situation, because we can see 10,000 years ago, when we've discovered agriculture, there was a matriarchal influenced society. Fertility of the earth was connected with the fertility of women, and women were revered and sometimes worshipped. And you get the different types of the full-figured women, and the society was leading that way, and therefore a lot more peaceful. But then we've discovered bronze and iron, and these ages have started, and along with them came the war machine, and then the masculinity has taken over. So do you think, rather than religion is the actual, because we know it's not divinely inspired, it's not coming from God, it's coming from humanity. Humanity is writing this, and it's already shifted because men have taken over after the discovery of the war machine, and agriculture is like yesterday's news. It's no longer a big deal. Men take over and start writing literature to suit their agenda. And therefore, it's more of a societal, social thing reflected by the man-made literature at the time being religion.
Well, I think that's as good I think there's a lot of anthropological theories out there about how patriarchy started. And certainly when you read the Bible, you can tell that the various writers of the Bible, wanted to suppress fertility cults. They wanted to suppress other religions. There's no question. The Ten Commandments even mentions other religions. I mean, it basically tacitly says you shall have no other God before thee. There are other gods, but I'm the one you're supposed to worship. A very polytheistic kind of underpinning there, just a competitive thing. And I think that theory that you've postulated is as good as any. But I think we have to move forward, and the way to move forward, in my opinion, is to ensure that we do not have theocracies, that our government bodies are free from religion. And that's why we named our group the Freedom from Religion Foundation, because in the United States, there's a lot of talk of freedom of religion. It's in our Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof is usually seen as freedom of religion. And we've pointed out, but that's also freedom from religion. The government is free from religion, and that's what gives all of us individual rights. And so you can believe what you like, but you can't always act on those beliefs in a secular republic or democracy. And I think that it's just absolutely pivotal for individual liberties, including women's rights and reproductive rights, to ensure that our governments are free from religion. And that is the great fight that we see going on around the world. the United States was first among nations to adopt a godless constitution. And instead of saying sovereignty was invested in a particular deity, whether it was Allah or Jesus, the U.S. Constitution said it's invested in we the people. And it's a very imperfect, we have a very imperfect country, of course, but at least that's a very good aspirational preamble. The aspirational part of it is what we appreciate at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And we wish that we could export secularism instead of McDonald's. But of course, many, many nations now have disestablished their religions. And I think that is what is going to save the human race, if we possibly can, and keep us moving forward.
So back into the conversation of abortion, because I think that's quite vital, and it's happening as we speak. And the beginning of the establishment of the United States, the founding fathers were deists at best, and I think deism was maybe a form of atheism back then, but they just want to lighten the blow, like the God of Spinoza sort of thing. Just like the world is not ready for this sort of thing, so maybe just take it easy and just ease them into it. And it's a wonderful start of a country. For the first time, there's a full constitution that does not mention the word of God, or sometimes it's mentioned, like in the words of Christopher Hitchens, mentioned to be contained, because if you taboo something completely, you end up making it sort of hot cake. People would want to know, what the hell is this thing that I'm not supposed to know about? So sometimes it's mentioned in bits and pieces to be contained within the realms of the system. In God we trust situation was the coin thing. We know it's more to do with politics, to do with Soviet Union rather than really belief in God. We understand the background. But the South has always been resistant. It's almost like two different countries in the US. You get the North, open-minded, a bit more, the Civil War that happened before is always something to do with stigma with the South, where they're resistant. They're very traditional, and it's called the Bible Belt for a reason, and obviously this is where the movement of the abortion banning it, is this constitutional? Is this going to stand in court? I mean, I understand the federal government, federal laws can be at a federal decentralized level. You can have certain laws, but in my understanding, if it's in contradiction with the actual constitution, it should not pass.
What's going on is that Texas passed this law, and Texas is, of course, in the South, that banned abortion at 6 weeks. And that's 2 weeks after you've missed your menstrual period. So most women don't even know they're pregnant. So as a result, this went into effect September 1st because the Supreme Court refused to block it. And that was the duty of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court should be upholding its own precedent, which is the 1973 decision Roe versus Wade. But because abortion rights have been hanging by 1 or 2 votes for years. But with Trump appointing 3 members of the Supreme Court and replacing a liberal member, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, with a very conservative one, they now have the votes, the right, the authority, if they want, to overturn Roe versus Wade. So instead of upholding their authority, the precedent of the court, they just said, we can't block this. We're going to let this happen. Even they have understood the distress, the catastrophe, how upset everybody is. We had a huge women's marches all over the country. And so then this past week on November 1st, they had a hearing about the Texas ban. And it was all procedural. It wasn't about the merits of it, who can sue. And it's because of the convoluted way that the Texas law was formatted that the government itself doesn't enforce the ban. Individual people are empowered to be bounty hunters if they think that a doctor has performed an abortion after 6 weeks, or they think a Uber driver helped a woman drive to the clinic. They can sue that individual, and if they win, they can get up to $10,000. It's a crazy law, but it was insidiously created with our court system in mind to make it as difficult as possible for the abortion clinics to sue over the law. They have a case going, and the Supreme Court on Monday seemed to indicate that they had the right to continue to sue over the passage of this law. They also held a hearing about the Department of Justice, which the federal government moved in and said, this is antithetical to our federal law. Texas women have a right to abortion, and we have to do something about it. And the justices seem less inclined to give the federal government a right to enter into this controversy. But in the meantime, nothing's being done to block the law in Texas. So thousands and thousands of women have been denied abortion care. And the average drive to get out of Texas, which is a huge state, the second most populous state in the country as well, is over 200 miles. And so this disproportionately is attacking young, low-income people of color, immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants, which there are a lot of in Texas. So it's creating huge havoc to all of these individuals and their lives. And they are flooding abortion clinics in Oklahoma and some nearby states. And then that's causing problems because there aren't that many clinics in these southern states. It's delaying appointments. The cost goes up. It becomes more and more difficult to get an abortion. The whole thing is a nightmare. So right now we're just in limbo in Texas. And then December 1st, the Supreme Court is hearing another ban out of Mississippi, another southern state, that is banning abortion at 15 weeks pregnancy, which is also antithetical to Roe versus Wade, which has a viability rule, which is based on science. And everybody expects the Supreme Court is going to uphold that, which basically is going to undermine the whole basis of Roe versus Wade. But it's not just the South. We have the state of Ohio, for example, right now poised to pass the same kind of ban as Texas. We have copycat laws being introduced in southern states, but also some other states to do the same thing. And it's a legal nightmare. But I think that reason may prevail because at the court hearing, they pointed out that anybody who wants to get around a federal right, in the United States, unfortunately, the right to bear arms is considered a federal right now. They're saying that, somebody who believes in gun control, the legislature could pass a law like this and give a bounty to people who don't like someone owning a gun, and then you wouldn't be able to address the law. And so the Supreme Court kind of thought, oh, that's a problem. So they've, when it's not women's rights, but it's gun rights, they're having second thoughts about it. But even if this particular version of an anti-abortion law is held to be unconstitutional, it does look like they're going to find other reasons to overturn Roe versus Wade. And it will be a state-by-state issue. And this is what it used to be like when I was a little girl. It was a few states had liberal abortion laws and the rest didn't. And all kinds of illegal abortions took place and all kinds of maternal injuries and deaths. And my mother used to refer women to Mexico City to get abortions. It wasn't legal there, but there was a safe clinic. We're going to see this kind of thing. And the people who have money can get the abortions and the people who don't can't. And there's already inequities in our system, but it's very disheartening to see this. And again, it is a religious war against abortion because that's the only organized opposition. That's the only reason. People cannot want an abortion themselves, but the only reason they organize to take away that right from others is based on religion.
And Laurie, do you think this is remnants of the Trump regime? Obviously, the installation of different evangelical Christians in different areas, and now this is their time to apply certain laws before maybe their departure and change the geography and the culture down the South?
Yeah, Trump campaigned saying that he would appoint only anti-abortion justices and that he would oversee reversing Roe versus Wade, and that's what he's done. And he basically let a group called the Federalist Society do all the vetting of the federal judges that he appointed. And he didn't just appoint a third of the Supreme Court, which is a 9-member court dominated by Catholics already, even before Trump. But he appointed a third of the whole federal judiciary. So our district court judges and our appeals court judges, a third of them appointed by Trump. And so for a group like the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which litigates when we can't solve violations of religion, entanglements of religion and government through education and persuasion, we've taken over 90 lawsuits. This is a very grave situation for us because the courts, this is a chilling effect on the courts. And they aren't just gunning for abortion rights, they're gunning for all of the wonderful court precedent that we have in this country, keeping religion out of our public schools. And we have about 10 attorneys, and they primarily are working to enforce existing law against prayer and religious indoctrination and coaches praying with students and so on. That's the most typical complaints that we get from members of the public. So that it's over half of our caseload legally is to enforce the current law against current precedent and laws against religion in our schools. And they have Trump and many of the appointments he's made to the Supreme Court have openly indicated their opposition to these various court decisions against religion in the schools. Excuse me. And as somebody who grew up in a community where I was the only little agnostic girl in the class, I know what it's like to be in a minority, to be a non-believer in the minority where you have religion imposed on you. I mean, I remember being so confused by the Pledge of Allegiance having religion in it. And as you pointed out, that Pledge of Allegiance was amended in the 1950s. And that's something we haven't been able to get at, but it creates a lot of feeling that the only true insiders who are true Americans are those who believe in one nation under God, or, in God we trust. Those are our latter-day violations or mottos, but they do turn non-believers and children into outsiders. So it's very important that we keep religion out of the schools because it's divisive and it builds walls between children. And it creates lots of opportunity for bullying, for picking on the minority.
I mean, one of the interesting things is as an outsider, somebody who lives outside of the US and watches the US sort of evolve over time, the one very curious fact is a country that's founded once on secular values. And it was so important, the pursuit of happiness, freedom of speech, all these wonderful values have inspired the world at some point. And you see now Europe is mostly kind of secular. Australia and New Zealand sort of moved away. And even if you're religious, you're no longer that sort of religious. You're cultural Christian or cultural Jew or cultural Muslim. Sort of people are not paying that much attention anymore. They might keep some traditional holidays and stuff like that, but they're not involved. But they look at the US and for a country that started that way, and the fascination, not just with religion, with cults and ideas of it's almost like the US is very large, and you trying to look for an identity within that large community, and you want to belong to something, to some idea or some group of people. And when you have such a large country like the US, you'll have these pockets of people, like subcategories within the category, and they're trying to find a place under the sun. Could it be that the South, always having identified with religion and faith and stuff like that, this is more like we're not going away. This is going to always be our way. We like big portion foods, and we love our gods.
Well, there's a lot of analysis now about the role of slavery in the whole, in some of these compromises. Slavery was written into the Constitution, and both Native Americans and slaves were to be counted in the census, but they were not full persons. And a lot of this was done to get the South to join in the United States of America, because that gave them more sway, more votes. And so it's very reprehensible, and we are, in the middle of a reckoning about 400 years of slavery in the United States and the need for reparations for slavery. It's a huge debate, as you know, in the United States, and we're not really making too much progress, but at least people are talking about it. So there were a lot of compromises that they gave to the South that gave them disproportionate power, including eventually the Electoral College that you may hear a lot of talk about, where we had Trump not winning the popular vote, but the Electoral College made him president. And that Electoral College was partly a compromise, again, for the South, to keep the slavery people, and then after the Civil War, keep them happy. So it's very unfortunate, but I don't want to just, we are a very mobile society. And at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, we have top 10 states, and most of them are South in terms of state church violations, but Ohio is always in the top of them. They are a northern state. And sometimes I feel that the whole United States is a Bible Belt, but we have really seen huge changes in the last 10 years, and the huge growth of the nuns, those of us who are unaffiliated, if not atheist and agnostic, and a huge decrease of fundamentalists. And that's, true everywhere. There are bigger pockets in many of the southern states. But our society is changing very rapidly, and part of that change is creating a backlash. The white fundamentalist vote, for example, is part of that backlash. And they are looking at a society where, white men are only 30% of the American population today. They're a minority. I mean, if you combine white women, of course, there's still a majority of white people, but that's part of the racist fear or the backlash. They see the shifting demographics in our country, and these demographics are going to change the United States, I think, very much for the better. But we are just having these growing pains and a pretty severe backlash. We saw, of course, what happened on January 6th was a real wake-up call. The attempted insurrection at our U.S. Capitol, so that the certification of Joe Biden as the president would not take place. And there was a huge Christian nationalist underpinning to that. We have a big news on that. We have a report coming out at the Freedom from Religion Foundation about the Christian nationalist underpinning. I mean, there were Christian flags as well as Confederate flags, but also there hasn't been as much attention to the Christian nationalist aspect of white supremacy. They're very much tied together. And so, yeah, there's a lot going on right now in our country, and a lot at stake.
Right. This is the last point, because I think we're going to wrap up in the next 5 minutes. I believe you and Dan have such a crazy day today, so I'm very mindful of that. Obviously, in context, I mean, we're shaking our heads are the situation in the U.S. happening right now. But when you zoom out and look at the big picture, and we look at countries like Afghanistan, for example, where women are hit on the street by a stick from a complete stranger, just conceive them to be, well, you're a female, you're a bit of wind just came and your ankle is shown, which is incredible. Saudi Arabia, women weren't allowed to drive until very recently, but something's happening. Saudi Arabia suddenly in the last year or so has gone a bit liberal to the point where they actually have music festivals, and women are no longer need to cover, which is incredible just in the last year because of that new young prince. But I'm very still mindful, because it's like Turkey and the Ataturk, and so it takes one person to come back and change that all over again. It's not a change by the people, it's changed by one person dictating the matter. Even Taliban and their second run now, they're promising that they are going to do a little bit better. I'm still very skeptic. I don't think they're going to change much. I think it's going to be a cover-up situation. But in context, the state of women, if you look, we look at the US, we said, oh, it's not really good. But when you look at, in general, South America, Muslim countries, the fight is still in its beginning. We're not even halfway.
Oh, I agree. And I wouldn't I wouldn't be a co-founder of a group like the Freedom from Religion Foundation if I weren't an optimist. And there have been so many strides. We of course, very conscious of what's going on in Afghanistan. In the state of Wisconsin, where I am, there are over 13,000 Afghan refugees at Camp McCoy, probably about 200 miles from where I am, who are being, housed and vaccinated, and everybody trying to figure out how to help them and get them integrated into American society. And those are the lucky ones. And I'm so sorry about, it's been a debacle. I think President Biden has done a generally very good job under tough circumstances, but that was really a huge misstep that it's a tragedy what's happened in Afghanistan. But generally speaking, these ideas are afoot. Liberty is afoot. Freedom is afoot. Other women in these countries can see how other women are living and what freedom they have. And that's not something that you can entirely suppress.
It's very good, Annie Laurie. I'm so happy that I've managed to finally have that word with you. I was looking forward to that for quite some time. Would you like to finish with any last statements or comments with regards to the subjects in general?
Yes, I think that if you live in a country or an area where you can speak out that you are a non-believer, that you're an atheist or agnostic, that is one of the most important things that you can do, because I think that free thinkers are the best advertisement for free thought, and that many people haven't knowingly met non-believers in certain areas of the United States or many other parts of the world. And if they know you're a non-believer, that's going to open up their eyes. And anything that you can do to support secular government, and whether it's fighting for gay rights or women's rights, reproductive rights, to speak up, because that's how we're going to get progress. And even something like climate change, we are seeing the heavy hand of religion so often, conservative religion allied with corporations, to stop that. I mean, it's really imperative for freedom in so many ways to work for freedom from religion in our government.
Well, thank you so much. This meeting is going to be subtitled within 24 hours into Arabic. So it's going to be watched by a lot of audiences from Egypt, Morocco, Saudi Arabia. So your voice is going to reach them, I hope, and hopefully will inspire some to lead in their own local areas. And I'd like to thank you so much from all my heart.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. All right, folks, this is the end of the program today, and I'll see you tomorrow.